Chapter 29 Trail of Blood. By the end of a day spent in District 11, Leo was exhausted. The crowded, run-down neighborhoods were buried in such thick layers of gloom, it was like wrapping his heart in a used, soggy towel. There was a distinct lack of all vehicles except the public bus and police cars, which only added to the overall unsettling nature of the district. Today, he and Melissa had decided to follow up on the other members of Bradburn's little burn pile. Drivota, Forohana, Varahina, and Salatra all had addresses in District 11. If Leo hadn't been the poster child of an average snepperd, and a snop to boot, he might have considered moving to this district, just to save a couple hundred Christum a month on rent. But this was a neighborhood where he'd definitely get stabbed, or shot, or hung by the neck from a light pole. That had happened once, about 20 years ago. An officer and the snepperd reporter riding along had both met with a mob in the streets of District 11, been pulled from their car, murdered, and strung up in defiance. Paddock had been Minister of Justice back then, too, and he swept in with such a display of force that the district's population was reduced by at least a quarter. The lucky ones wound up in District 8, while the unlucky ones were left to be collected by family. Any not collected by family were scooped up in garbage trucks and dumped outside the bulb. There hadn't been an incident like it since, but that didn't mean Leo was going to test his luck. And really, was it any wonder that both sides hated each other? Barbarity had been quashed with exponentially more barbarity. Both the instigating incident and the subsequent response made Leo's stomach churn, and he forced his mind back on his surroundings. Nolfs on the street hurried into non-metal alleyways where Leo's car couldn't follow, even if he wanted to. Nolfs in their yards ushered their children inside as he drove past. Almost all of this district was neighborhood, so he drove as if any moment someone could dart in front of him. Good thing, too. He saw the ball bounce out of the yard and into the street seconds before the kit hopped the fence and chased after it, too young to be thinking about cars. Leo laid into his reverse thrusters, stopping his car with at least a foot to spare. Angry yelling reached his ears, even through the rolled-up windows. An older sibling was hopping the fence now, chewing out the younger one in Nolf. The younger one scooped up the ball, but looked like he expected to be smacked for something he didn't seem to understand. The older one gave Leo a knowing look as he positioned himself between the car and his sibling, before walking them both back out of the street. Seed Mother, District 11 just invited tension. Leo gave what felt like a friendly smile and a nod, but it earned him little more than a suspicious glare in return. Slowly, he drove on. He'd already stopped at Varahina's house. There'd been no reply when he knocked on the door, which wasn't a surprise. People around here treated snops like vampires. To invite one into your home was to invite in death itself. He checked around back of the house, but found no entry or response there either. A glance in the windows had shown furniture and dishes and modest decorations, so the house was at least lived in. Even the neighbors had ignored him, so when no one answered his third time of knocking, he'd moved on. Pulling over to check in with Tolson from a payphone, he learned Melissa had experienced similar luck. She checked Dravota's address, but no one had answered. The house had sounded empty. She had managed to talk to one of Dravota's neighbors, albeit briefly. They said Dravota and his family left the neighborhood with a car of snepperds the week before, but it didn't strike them as an arrest. Dravota had seemed willing as he ushered his kids along. Now she was heading to Forohana's address. It was a 30-minute drive from that payphone to Salatra's house. Upon arriving, Leo parked the car in front and stared out at the house with a growing sense of dread. His eyes triggered his instincts before his brain finished processing. Grabbing his replacement Edwest 38 and holster from the glove box, Leo fastened the holstered weapon under his arm and exited the car. He left a hand on the gun as he approached the small front gate. Sparing a quick glance for the open mailbox beside it showed it was empty, though it looked like the tiny door had nearly been ripped from its hinges. The gate itself hung at an awkward and bent angle. A rusted metal latch lay discarded on the well-cracked sidewalk. Weeds sprung up on either side of the walk, choking out what was probably once a decent lawn. The front door of the house was ajar, with an enormous crack nearly splitting the door itself in half. The porch creaked as Leo stepped onto it, and he flinched, his hand tightening on the grip of his gun. As if the door wasn't evidence enough, further inspection of the door frame made it obvious this had been forced entry. Drawing his gun and his breath, Leo counted to 3 and swung inside. The dull glow of fading fireroom lights illuminated a living room that had been trashed. Couches and armchairs were leaking stuffing. Picture frames lay on the ground in localized piles of broken glass. Claw marks left trails in the wallpaper where they must have been hung before. Carefully, Leo knelt to look at one of the pictures. He recognized the family right away. No mistake, this was the right house. The kitchen was in a similar state of disrepair. Fragments of shattered glasses and dishes intermingled on the creaking wooden floor. Cupboard doors had been thrown open and drawers overturned. Leo peeked out the window to the backyard, but saw nothing of note. More weeds overtook an unkept homemade playset, but there was no one outside. He cleared the rest of the first floor quickly, finding nothing worth examining in the bathroom or closet. He made note of the old rotary telephone on an end table in the hall, as he was likely to need it shortly. Moving upstairs was equally stressful to clearing the first floor. Every step creaked so loud, Leo was sure every neighbor within a mile had heard. On the second floor, he found a study and a pair of bedrooms. The study had a collection of instruments, most of which had been vandalized. What strings remained on them did little to support their snapped wooden frames. A hole had been punched in the drywall in here, another broken picture frame laying on the ground beneath it. Leo checked it quickly to find a portrait of Naira and her husband together in the fanciest attire he'd ever seen Nulfs wear. More claw marks on the walls leading to the bedrooms, almost at Leo's shoulder height. Nulfin claws were naturally dull things, unlike sharp sneppered claws, so Leo had little doubt about what kind of person had left these. The master bedroom was similarly ransacked. Drawers had been overturned, the nightstand tossed on its side, and the closet's contents were abandoned in a heap on the floor. The next bedroom was in the attic. One of the rungs on the ladder leading up to the top had been snapped through, despite being almost an inch thick. Raising his gun, Leo peeked his head into the attic. The things up here had been rifled through as well, but not as thoroughly as the master bedroom. About the worst damage up here was that the mattress had been slid off the bed. Creaking his way back down to the first floor, Leo made his way to the other stairwell he'd seen, one heading down. These had their own unique timbre of complaint as he descended to yet another broken door. This one hadn't just been broken at the jamb. The hinges had been snapped off at the frame, and the door lay in 2 pieces on the concrete floor. The lights down here were exceedingly dull, meaning the bulbs were nearing the end of their 25-hour life cycle. The basement had also been thoroughly trashed. There was less to explore down here, and Leo quickly confirmed there was no one hiding down here. He was truly alone in this place. Only then did he holster his gun. He found a couple oddities down here. The bathroom, of all things, had been vandalized, as one of the water lines had been snapped and bent out at an unnatural angle. There was a guest bedroom, with a pair of handcuffs attached to the rods of the headboard. Thankfully, no one was in them. When nothing else grabbed his attention, he returned to the main floor to give Tolson a call. To his relief, the phone dialed out. Whoever had trashed the place hadn't cut the phone line. "Officer Tolson Gray, Precinct 3, how can I assist you?" "Tolson?" "Leo, I've got news for you." "Yeah," Leo said, glancing back at the mess in the living room. "I've got some news too." "Hold on, grabbing a pen." Leo didn't wait. "I'm calling you from Salatra's house. It's a mess. Insides look like someone turned into a werewolf in here and just tore the place apart." "Anyone there?" Tolson asked in alarm. "No, just me. But someone was definitely here in the last 20 hours. Someone big and someone angry. Left claw marks all over the place. Seems like they've got whiter fingers and taller legs than me." "Uncle Wilter?" "Can't prove it, but that was my first thought. Unless you need to make a confession." Tolson snorted. "You know how much work walking up one flight of stairs at the office is? You think I'd have the energy to tear up a house?" "Yeah, I figured. What's your news?" "Melissa just called. Said she stopped at Forohana's address. She heard people in the house, but they never answered the door. Didn't even tell her to go away or anything. She tried looking in the windows, but they'd drawn all the curtains. Neighbors didn't help her, so she fed a note through the mail slot with our number and an offer to talk. No one's called in, though. Leo felt a spike of concern, looking again at the damage to the house around him. She's not there anymore? Nope. Said she was going to follow up on something she talked about with you? About the kit and lockup? Oh, right. Yeah, that was important. Leo pinched the bridge of his nose. With what I've seen here, I'd like to check on Forohana's place again, just to be safe. Hopefully, next time I call you, it'll be from there. They said their goodbyes, and Leo hung up. He took a quick look around, grimaced, and hurried out to his car. His finger tapped on his steering wheel like a marching band instructor with no internal sense of consistent timing. The itch was singing at him, but he gripped the steering wheel harder. When it didn't quiet, he ripped the half-empty pack of Necrals from his jacket pocket and tossed it into the back seat out of reach. That didn't really help. However, he was determined to keep his eyes on the road, and suffering like this just meant he was alive and not in a hospital, the two most important things. Forohana's house was on the other side of District 11, and it took nearly 40 minutes to get there. It was an agonizing period of time spent with nothing but his thoughts to drown out the siren song. One was beautiful and deadly, while the other was ugly and irritating. Both options sucked. At long last, Leo pulled onto the correct street. He watched the numbers to find the right house, but he didn't need to bother. Once he was close enough, the right house was obvious. Leo's gun was out again as he dashed up the path. He rushed past the broken door and was hit by an overpowering smell of smoke and char as he entered the house. It didn't take him long to find the bodies. There were 5 scattered throughout the house. 2 adults, 3 kids, 2 of which looked very young. Multiple gunshot wounds, high-caliber rounds. Leo glanced around for casings, but didn't see any. A couple bodies bore scratch marks. Leo smelt burnt flesh as well. Ah, Nina! He slammed his hand into the wall, and it came away covered in soot. Scorch marks marred the wallpaper in here. Miraculously, the fire hadn't spread. While there were no visible casings to speak of, there were some crystalline fragments near the adult bodies. Other than the bodies, and damage left over from whatever fight happened here, nothing really looked touched. This hadn't been a robbery. It had been an execution. He found the phone, but there was no dial tone when he picked up. The line had been melted in the fire. Dravota and his family getting in a car with strangers a week before. Salatra disappearing shortly after Renetta Dolahan disappeared, but still placed at the factory that night. Now her home was in shambles, having been turned over for something. No response from Varahina's home. And Forohana and her family murdered in the space between Melissa's visit and Leo's. Maybe Bradburn had realized burning his records wasn't enough to clean up his trail. If so, that left Orana, who lived in District 9, and Tigra in District 8's prison. The prison. Oh no, Melissa! By the time the thought completed, Leo was already sprinting for his car. I'm here to see Rolf. He's my son. This is his sister, and their friend. Naira introduced them all in turn. The prison guard behind the glass at the front counter looked so unconcerned that she probably made it her business not to remember names and faces. She did, however, stare at Naira for an uncomfortable amount of time. Her gaze finally fell away, and she consulted some papers Naira couldn't see. There's only 20 minutes left in the visit-in period, the guard finally said. I suggest you return tomorrow. What? Naomi blurted. But we can't wait that long. Naira calmly placed a hand to Naomi's wrist. She shared the sentiment, but working with people like this required a certain level of tact and false politeness. What my daughter means, Naira said, shooting her a deliberate look, before turning back towards the guard behind the glass, is that we came as soon as we heard. But you know how the bus schedule can fall behind, and this isn't exactly a common stop, so we had a lot of walking to do as well. The guard's face didn't even show a shred of sympathy. Sorry. I wouldn't know. I drive to work, and I don't set the policies. But surely you can make an exception for his mother. The guard stared at her with an expression like her soul had clocked out hours ago. Finally, her chair creaked, and she leaned over her papers again. Name? For Rohana, and this is my daughter, Ranomandy, Naomi cut in. And my bestest friend, Pips. Moira's eyes bulged, and she threw a low punch into Naomi's thigh. It did little to deter the older girl's grin. Thankfully, if the guard noticed, she obviously didn't care. Head to the door on your left, and I'll let you in. If you follow me, I'll bring you to the waiting room. Naira blinked in surprise. She'd expected to need to argue more for that. She'd been mentally preparing herself to force tears. But no. Apparently, the guard was just ready to go. Naira nodded eagerly. Right away. Come on, girls. The girls were currently trading obscene hand gestures beneath the counter and slapping at each other. Naomi was having far too much fun tormenting the young Sneppard, though Moira didn't look quite as upset as she played up. The guard unlocked the door, and they all stepped into the hall with her. She led them through a series of depressing concrete halls, painted a color like gray had vomited onto green. It was uncomfortably nostalgic for Naira. She'd seen these halls multiple times when she was the girls' age. It didn't feel good to be back, visitor or not. Leading them past a few more offices, closets, and a restroom, the guard stopped at a door labeled Visitation. She opened it and waved them inside. A pair of guards stood at the back of this room, facing a long pane of glass set over an equally long desk with multiple booths. It was mirrored on the other side of the glass, with chairs at every booth. Visitors on this side, prisoners on the other, and small phones to connect them to each other. A couple of the chairs were taken already. 2 Sneppard prisoners were both receiving visits, one with family, and the other with what Naira presumed to be a friend. No, the noises they were making into the phone as Naira and the girls walked past implied a bit more than just friends. Beside her, Moira wrinkled her nose and scowled at something she'd heard. All the way to the end, the guard escorting them said, in her harsh, energy-devoid voice. There were plenty of open seats next to the Sneppard visitors in here, but of course, that was just the way of things. Naira nodded and took a seat at the far end. Naomi and Moira each pulled up seats of their own to wait with her. Your boy's in B2 at the moment. It's going to take a few minutes to bring him up, so wait here. B2? That brought another wave of unpleasant nostalgia. He'd only been here a few days, and they'd already decided to hide him in the dark? Now she really hoped her plan worked. If they didn't bring Rolf up to them, it was going to be one fanina of a slog down into the prison depths to get him. Not impossible, but much, much harder. Naira nodded, giving a small bow in her seat. Thank you for your time. The guard snorted and muttered, Thanks, Seed Mother, it's not much time. Before leaving, the same guard stopped to whisper something to one of the guards along the wall. He shot a glance at Naira and her party, then nodded and whispered something in return. Moira glanced in that direction, then looked back at Naira with an expression verging on panic. Leaning in, the girl whispered, She said she was going to tell the warden that someone they'd been waiting for was here. Are we already in trouble? Naira forced a smile that her fears still combated. No sense in worrying yet. They might have been expecting Rolf's parents to show up. What if they recognized you? Moira hissed. Haven't you been here before? She's got a point, Mrs. N, Naomi agreed. Clamping down on the fear swelling in her chest, Naira said in a calm, controlled voice, I haven't been here in over 20 years. I don't recognize any of the guards, and I highly doubt they would remember the face of any Nolf. I promise you, they're just thinking of Rolf's parents. Moira gave a slow nod as if trying to convince herself. Her face didn't look like she'd been successful. The 2 guards in the back were watching them now. Moving closer to each other, they began talking in hushed voices well below anything Naira could make out. Moira's ears twitched once, twice. Whatever they were talking about only seemed to be adding to her stress. What are they saying? Naira asked quietly. Moira grimaced. Not anything worth repeating. They know about Rolf, and they don't seem to think highly of him. So they're saying a few rude things about us. Especially you two. They haven't said much about me. Then her grimace turned into a glare. Never mind, one just called me the Kit. Hate to break it to you, Pips, Naomi whispered, but you are still a Kit. Seed Mother, I know that. But they're probably going to think I'm like 10 or 12 or something. Does it matter? Naira asked. Moira looked like she'd just been asked if the bulb itself mattered. I'm 16, so yeah, it matters. Naira did her best to hide her smile, choosing the safe answer of, I see. Minutes crawled by. Naira kept glancing up at a clock set in the back wall, watching the minute hand ratchet inevitably forward. Every time she saw how little time had passed, she regretted looking. Still, she couldn't stop herself from checking every time she thought of it, which, unfortunately, was a frequent thing. Eventually, the family of Sneppards finished their conversation, seeing themselves out as the visitee on the other side of the glass was ushered away. The remaining couple had grown intimate with the glass. There was no other word to describe it, and Moira was making it a point to not spare them even a glance. For her part, Naomi looked as unbothered by that behavior as she would by a family in a public park. When she noticed how much it bothered Moira, she leaned down to start whispering a play-by-play. And still, the minutes crawled on. There were now maybe 5 minutes left in the official visiting period. Finally, the door opened, and 2 new guards stepped in. Walking up to the 2 guards in the back, they took up station beside them. One quietly distributed something to the rest. Electrum batteries. No doubt for the shock batons they each wore. Maybe Moira's fears weren't unfounded after all. Naira readjusted the bag on her shoulder. It was lighter now. Only half their stock of shimmer remained in the bag. Naomi and Moira had split the other half. Naomi had taken a good chunk of the aquam crystals, and Naira had, after much convincing, allowed Moira to take a handful of the aurum crystals. So they were prepared if things went to Fanina in a handbasket, but Naira really hoped it wouldn't come to that. All 4 guards were eyeing them now, maintaining some kind of whispered conference. Naira leaned into the girls, smacking Naomi lightly on the shoulder. Give the hazing a rest. Moira, what are they saying? Naomi glanced back, now spotting the additional guards. Moira didn't turn to look, but her ears swiveled. A moment later, they flattened. They're on standby, she whispered. I think they're hoping that we make a scene. They're discussing the last time they got to shock anybody. One's bragging about doing it this morning. The girl's eyes widened. One just said, we were expecting her to show. Does that mean they knew we were coming? Moira, Naira said, struggling to keep her voice low and calm. It's okay. Talked about this. They were probably expecting his mother to make an appearance. Moira's panic mingled with frustration and outrage. They've gone back to calling you things I don't want to repeat. Now they're debating which one of you two is hotter and who they'd rather... Ugh. She trailed off with a look of disgust, and beside her, Naomi uttered a low growl. Well, Naira wasn't going to feel quite so bad anymore if she had to knock some heads together tonight. She glanced at the clock. The minute hand stuck straight up. When had that happened? Naira's heart sank. So much for the easy plan. Visiting hours were over. Looking through the glass, a guard on the other side had noticed and was tapping the remaining prisoner on the shoulder. The guards on this side glanced up at the clock, and one called out, All right, that's it for today. Time to go home. You can always come back again tomorrow. The couple parted, but only after guards on either side pulled them away. The pair of new guards started walking closer. One called out, Ladies, you're gonna have to come back tomorrow. Naomi tensed, reaching into her jacket for where she'd put her shimmer, but Naira placed a hand on her knee. They exchanged a look, and Naira mouthed, Not yet. Then, raising her voice, Naira said, The lady at the front said to wait, that she would bring him but it would take a little longer than usual because he's in D2. B2, the guard corrected. Right, I'm sorry, that one. But she assured us we would get to see him today. Rules are rules. Visiting hours are over. It's time to get out of the pool. The guard shook his head with a wicked smirk. Sorry, I forgot. You probably don't know what that means. It's time to go. Naomi's eyes bulged a little, her face searching Naira's for any excuse to jump into action. Naira felt her own blood boiling, and her hand drifted towards the flap of her bag. She caught herself and forced it to rest on top. She'll be right back, I'm sure. You can ask the others. By now, he'd reached them. He was big, but not overly big. Not extremely tall, either. A little heavy, maybe. She doubted he had half as much wit as girth. In that case, he suggested, we could take you to a different waiting area for an after-hours visit. Naira's fingers dug into the fabric of her bag. Whereas disgust had turned to anger, and Naomi had already grabbed something inside of her jacket. Salatra wanted to explode. As this man stood before them, taller only because they were seated, his smile growing lecherous with thoughts only he and Anima knew, Salatra wanted to explode. Naira weighed her options. Was there any hope that the first guard would actually return? It seemed unlikely. She'd probably clocked out the moment she left the room. The only question was if it was more prudent to drop the guards in this room, or see if they'd take them deeper into the prison first. She could smell the man now. His clothes hadn't been washed in days. She doubted he saw a need for much care and personal hygiene. His breath carried elements of the roast beef sandwich and potato chips he'd had for his last meal. There wasn't any fear on him, only growing confidence and expectation. Salatra needed to explode. Naira slowly pulled the flap back, her hand reaching inside. Her fingers brushed against rows of crystals as she searched for the row of shimmer. She felt the cool metal touch of the canisters and gripped one firmly. Beside her, Moira grabbed the man's shock baton, activated it, and drove it into his gut. It happened in a split second, leaving both Naomi and Naira stunned. They weren't the only stunned party. The man convulsed, and Moira stood up to lean into him, keeping him in contact with the baton until it was depleted. Naira glanced down the hall to see two of the guards ushering the snappered visitor out the door. The other guard was watching them, but would turn in moments. She needed to act. Throwing the flap open, she glanced inside and grabbed an electrum crystal. Quietly, she stood, raising the shimmer canister to her teeth as she stalked towards the next guard. Before she could bite down, the visitation room door opened again. The guard from the front counter peeked in, along with a female not in a prison guard's outfit, but a regular officer's uniform. It was with this second person that Naira made eye contact, and they recognized each other immediately. This was the one who helped her pull Detective Leo from his car. The detective's eyes widened as she saw Naira. They widened further as she saw the canister Naira held to her teeth, and she gave her head a rapid, almost imperceptible shake. Naira stopped inches from the guard's exposed back. She dropped her hands behind her back as he turned to regard her with confusion and alarm. He hadn't realized she'd gotten so close. "If I could have you all come with me," the front desk guard announced in her soulless voice. "Come on, girls," Naira called. Looking back, she saw Naomi and Moira awkwardly leaning the guard's body against the wall. Naomi's firm grip on his vest was the only thing keeping him upright, and Naira prayed the other guards couldn't see that. "Larry," the front desk guard said, "go help Frank and Desmond with lobby cleanup so we can clock out right when night shift arrives." The guard, closest to Naira, looked quite excited at this order, and bumped into the detective in his haste to leave the room. "Ron?" the front desk guard asked. "Hey, Ron! You dead back there or what?" Naira clenched the crystal in her grip tighter. She could drop this woman if needed, but she would have to do it before any alarm was raised. Both Naomi and Moira seemed to realize the implications, and glanced at the guard they were leaning against the wall, and at Naira. "Ron!" the front desk guard barked again. You good to clean up in here? Naira took a careful step towards the door, narrowing the gap she would need to close. Then the guard, Ron, stirred. His hand lifted in the most awkward, half-hearted thumbs-up Naira had ever seen. That's when Naira spotted Moira's little hand clutching the back of his. The front desk guard glared at him, her hand resting uncomfortably close to the gun on her belt. Finally, she snorted. Silent treatment again. Ron, you're a piece of work. Then she turned away. As I said, the rest of you, come with me. Naira felt her shoulders sag in relief as the woman disappeared from view. She gestured to the girls. Letting the body of the unconscious guard slump against the wall, they hurried to meet her at the door. Chapter 30. Secrets in Lockup. Melissa gawked as a sneppered kit in a neon tricolor jacket and a tall Nolf with a ridiculous pink mohawk both innocently scurried out of the visitation room as if they hadn't just played pantomime with the guard they'd left slumped against the wall. Ira? She whispered as the final Nolf left the room. Please tell me that man isn't dead. For her part, the teacher nodded. Then she offered a smile like she hadn't been about to do something to the other guard either. He will be fine. Great, Melissa said, trying to convince herself more than anything. They fell in behind the two girls who had enough of a height disparity between them to suggest that the kit was quite young. Mind telling me what you're doing here? I'm here to visit a friend, Detective. And you? Of course. Naira must have come back for Tigra. I'm here to recover a person of interest, Melissa said. This earned her a raised eyebrow from the teacher by day, magician by night, but Naira didn't inquire further. So Melissa pressed on. Who are these two? Karana, the kit announced herself, turning back to look Melissa up and down. The Nolf beside her looked surprised, raising an eyebrow and mouthing the word, Really? Karana glowered. That is my name. Then the two stuck out their tongues before giving each other an escalating series of rude hand gestures. No need for such subterfuge here, Naira said. Detective McKinley, this is Moira and Naomi. Girls, this is Detective McKinley. She once helped me save a man's life. As Melissa recollected, it was this woman who had done all the saving. Melissa had only helped to drag Leo a few extra feet away from the flaming wreckage. Both girls looked immediately curious, so Melissa added, My idiot friend got his car blown up, and would have died if Salatra hadn't been there. This earned her a sharp look from Naira, so Melissa regarded her with a knowing smile and doubled down. Salatra was a hero that day. This is as far as I take you, guardswoman Polly said as she opened a door ahead of them. Warden's office is the second door on your left. Talk to him about going down to B2. All four ladies filed through the door, thanking the guard in turn. The thanks washed off her like soup from the lips of a 13. Locking the door behind her, the guard left them there. The two girls had their attention drawn to the wall of windows, as it let them see out into the Nolfin cell block common areas. Looked like dinner was just wrapping up. Pulling Naira aside, Melissa tugged on her shoulder to whisper up to her ear. We've been looking for you. We're going to need to talk after this. There's questions that need to be answered. Naira shook her head. I have no answers. Salatra, we want to help. We need to understand what's going on. The teacher regarded her like she was a troublesome student on the first day. Not that Melissa knew that look personally, but she'd seen Leo and Tolson earn it in numerous classes. It's Naira now. Salatra is dead. That was the deal. What deal? Naira grimaced. I can't talk about it. Melissa would have asked more, but the door to the warden's office opened. A surprisingly scrawny man, the warden's limbs looked thinner than the door he clung to. I understand you're here to make visits and inquiries. Taking a step out of Naira's space, Melissa nodded. I'm here to conduct several follow-up interviews for my chief. The word had almost lost its bitterness by now. It helped that Leo was actually trying to do the job, even if he was both the luckiest and the least qualified person for it. He had a good moral compass, but man did he suck at understanding and following procedure. Clearing her voice to cover her awkward pause, she continued. Chief Parsons came through to conduct interviews yesterday, so I'm following up today. Ah, I see, the warden said. Well, that is wise. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that visiting hours are past, and you will have to come back tomorrow. However, I would be happy to pass on any of my own notes on the prisoners in question. Melissa shook her head. Charter 8, Article 4, Section 2, paragraphs 1 through 3 dictate that a suspect being held for questioning is required by law to have a follow-up interview from a different officer, so that truth may be accounted by more than just one witness. I would like that follow-up now. The warden's head sunk towards his shoulders. But the articles of conduct are intended for sneppards. I'm afraid that the prisoners in question are not, in fact, sneppards, and as such, the articles do not apply. Article 7, Section 3, Amendment 2 adds provisional allowances for other species when appropriate jurisdiction is invoked. Article 2, Section 5, paragraphs 2 through 4 state that the suspect of an ongoing investigation is under the jurisdiction of the district that has opened the investigation, as it has been determined that there is probable cause to connect the incident at District 4's primary hospital with District 3's ongoing investigation into the recent unfortunate murders of members of the 13, it follows that both prisoners in question are in fact rightfully under District 3 jurisdiction, and I am invoking my right to interview them with intent to transfer. The warden's eyes went blank, darting around as if he could visually track the flow of conversation. It was usually the effect that invoking the articles had. Few learned it for more than to pass an exam. Fewer still memorized it. Melissa was one of those few. It had proved its usefulness more than once. She'd yet to encounter someone she couldn't outmaneuver with interpretation and invocation of the articles. Most people were so bored by them, it was an easy way to get people to roll over and give her what she needed. That seemed to be the effect they were having now. Did you say intent to transfer? The warden asked when he finally found words. Melissa smirked. Yes, she had. I did. I need to make a phone call. One moment. Please, take your time, Melissa said, knowing that anyone he called would tell him she was operating within her appropriate bounds. The door rattled shut as he disappeared back into his office. Both prisoners? Naira asked. She looked at the one with the mohawk, Naomi, who shrugged before shaking her head. There's a dozen prisoners in B2, Melissa said, plus or minus 1 or 2, but there's 2 in particular I need to talk to, one of whom is the one you're here for. How does she know who we're here for? Moira the Kit asked, her hands buried past the wrist in the pockets of her ridiculously poofy jacket. Because I told her, Naira said with all the patience of a teacher. You told us, snop? Naomi blurted with a vehemence that caught Melissa by surprise. Not because of the disdain evident in her voice, but the implication that their visit was likely not intended to be fully legal. Tigra had warned Leo that Naira would try to break him out if she knew. But had she really brought a kit and a barely adult along for a jailbreak? She has shown me trust and respect. I am simply doing the same, Naira said. Then she gave Melissa the look that only a mother can, the one that sees into your very heart and smells the dross hidden inside. She continued, just because the carton smells rotten doesn't mean every egg inside has gone bad. That didn't seem to do much to reassure the 2 girls, but they dropped the point and returned to watching prisoners out the window. Melissa walked back over to Naira, lowering her voice to a whisper once more. If you let me, I can and will help you, Naira. Naira snorted, looking down at the ground. A polite smile came to her face as she turned her gaze to Melissa. We will see. Glancing back at the warden's office, Melissa saw him through the window, receiver still pressed to his ear. Long phone call. Curiosity overcame her, and she wandered over towards the door. Closing her eyes, she strained to hear anything from inside. As she focused, she was rewarded with snippets of his side of the conversation. Of course, sir. And I understand that. A pause. But she's on my doorstep, quoting the articles at me. Another pause. Sure you don't want to postpone? Let things blow over? Pause. Opportunity? She's a detective. Doesn't that seem... A much longer pause. No, I understand, sir. We will continue as planned. Thank you, sir. As the call finally came to an end, the warden hung up the phone. Through the window, she saw him remove his cap and run his hand through his hair. He stared off into the distance for a few long moments before letting out a big sigh. Then he grabbed his keyring and put his cap back on. Melissa stepped back as he opened the door. I've been told to take you down to B2. Excellent, Melissa said, feeling a rush as the articles earned her way yet again. If people didn't want the articles weaponized, they shouldn't have let politicians draft them. His reluctance was evident in his stride as the warden led them along. You're sure you don't want to come back tomorrow? It would be easier for all parties. B2 is dangerous for... He trailed off. Melissa refused to relinquish her victory. She'd earned this, and she was going to have it. Tomorrow is too late. Indeed, the warden muttered. They passed a lot of cells with Nulfs in orange jumpsuits. Per Naira's warning, the two girls stayed well out of reach of the bars. What the Nulfs couldn't reach with their hands, they could still reach with their eyes. It made for a distinctly unpleasant walk. After circling the perimeter, they descended a staircase that eventually led them to the dark dungeon known as B2. The warden lifted his ID to a small panel by the door, holding it there. After a few seconds, there was a loud buzz and a heavy metallic thud as the door unlocked. Melissa may not have been a Nulf, but the smell was still the first thing she noticed as they entered. Dim firearm flicked overhead, casting the cells down here in ominous shadows. About half of them were empty. Hadn't Leo said there were more prisoners? Downsized recently? Melissa asked the warden. The warden almost jumped as her question broke the silence. What? Oh, no. We just had a few get too rowdy and had to put them in solitary cells for a while. Aren't they already in their own cells down here? Not the same effect as being in a padded cube. Out here, they can't reach each other, but they can still talk. Not that they really do. Locks look sturdy, Naira commented. Heavier duty stuff down here? The warden blinked as if surprised by the question, especially since it came from a Nulf. We've had some escapes from down here before. Now there's a backup electrum lock system. Lets us control or override a few main doors remotely in case of an emergency. But the cell doors themselves are an older design? He narrowed his gaze at Naira, who raised her hands in innocence. Sorry, I'm a teacher. Inquiring mind and all that. They passed a cell where the Nulf inside had his arm shoved down the toilet up to his elbow. He paid them no mind, muttering to himself. Lucky one. Lucky one. Don't you want to be the lucky one? Have to be the lucky one. Lucky ones aren't food. She caught a glimpse of his eyes. If the firearm lighting down here hadn't been so atrocious, she would have sworn she saw a hint of fractal glow. Moira, the kit, had stopped to stare. She'd obviously heard his mutterings, too. Melissa put a hand on her shoulder, and the kit jumped. Come on, Melissa encouraged. How can they do this to people? Moira asked quietly. Some people are very bad, Melissa said, and it's safer for everyone in the bulb to keep the bad people in here. How do you know who's bad? You can't, until you catch them in the act. If it helps, everyone down here is a convicted murderer. Or an unconvicted Alchemancer, she thought. The kit's ears flattened and her tail drooped. That doesn't help at all. It just makes me want to be here even less. Yeah, I don't like this place any more than you do. Ahead of them, the warden lifted his ID up to a small panel beside the door. There was a loud humming noise and another heavy ka-chunk as a lock inside disengaged. He still had to use his keyring on another lock after that before the door swung open. They really didn't want their secret getting out. They followed him into a new hall, one with heavy steel doors and closed viewing slats. There were 5 in total, each with no visible keyhole. Just a little panel beside the door and a small firearm light to show occupation status. 4 were occupied. She could hear them inside. No specifics, but she could hear something. Again, the kit heard it too, trembling like she'd heard a predator stalking about on the other side. Disengaging the electric lock on a more normal-looking door, the warden led them into a small, dark room. He reached around the corner without looking and toggled a light switch. Overhead, a single firearm light sparked to life. Leo had not done the description justice when he said it was dark in here. Beckoning with his arm, the warden gestured inside. Your prisoners await. I'll just be waiting out here. Protocol and all that. Both Nolfs ran past him into the room, looking almost led by their noses as they headed for opposite cells. Melissa thanked the warden, who closed the door and locked it. Leo hadn't mentioned that. You know, Melissa called through the door, a transfer is not the same thing as an escape. I'm terribly sorry, the warden called back. I tried to warn you, but there's a schedule to keep and things are out of my hands. The test must go on. Test? Moira asked, her own ear pressed to the door. What's he talking about? I don't know, Melissa admitted. Then she pounded on the door. If you don't unlock this door right now, I'll be reporting this to your supervisor. There was no reply. She tried quoting more of the articles at him, but again, no reply. Great. They were trapped. Moira was not going to cry. They'd walked past hundreds of crazy, scary people, some of whom were murderers, and most of whom had ogled her. Now they'd been locked in a concrete hole in the ground, with no windows, one way in and out, and one fritzing firearm light bulb. So really, what was there to cry about? She was going to die down here. Starve to death, or be tested. The test must go on, the warden had said. What the brack did that mean? Her mother had no idea where she or Naira had gone. No one knew either of them had come here. There was a detective with them. Maybe people would know she was gone and come for her. A little ways away, Naomi was rattling the door to one of the cells in here. Someone else had joined her from the other side of the bars. Rolf. They held hands for a long moment and then they kissed. Or tried to, through the bars. Of course they kissed. Neither of them had any shame or respect. Trapped in a fanina hole 30 feet below ground, with no guarantee you'd see the surface again? Better start making out. Seed Mother, they were actually slobbering on the bars. Shaking her head, Moira shuddered and focused her attention on Naira. She was having a mini reunion of her own, one that seemed far more palatable. At the very least, all she'd done was reach in through the bars to take someone's hand. The lighting was abysmal down here, and it took a moment to realize the shadow filling most of that cell was a living, breathing person. He was huge. Dude looked like he ate boulders for breakfast and washed them down with tea brewed from the entire top half of a tree. He had to be almost double Moira's height. Why? Why the bracking fanina did everyone and their animal-loving mother have to be so tall? Seed Mother had come to her name on the list and said, You know what'd be fun? Making her 5 foot tall when you count her ears. That'll make her special. Forget being special. When it came to height, Moira would have taken average over special any day of the week. The world was not fair. The giant smiled, stepping a little closer towards the light. Seed Mother, this was a tiger. A living, breathing, mythical barbarian from the stories. Well, from Genthes. Only little kits believed that dross about tigers being anything like the bare-chested Kunin the tiger, who punched dinosaurs in the face and rescued warrior princess Xena from the wicked magician Ex-Skeleton. Yes, Moira had the entire 16-book collection, but she hadn't read them in at least a year. She didn't need to. Not when she had them all memorized anyway. I can't believe it, Naira was saying. You're still here? I never left, the tiger said, in a deep rumble that wore an exotic accent like a cloak. Moira had to hear this man's voice next time she took Shimmer. Tigra, I'm so sorry. Bradburn said you'd gone back to Genthes. I never should have believed him. Ha! The tiger said, white fluff on his chest bellowing out with his laugh. I warn all of you all times. Bradburn's sweet words hide rotting fish. But why you here? I told Chief this happened if you know. Actually, Naira admitted, we're here to rescue him. She pointed at the cell across the room, and Naomi and Rolf had finally stopped being gross long enough for Naomi to start freezing the lock. The detective had seen her doing this, and now watched over her shoulder in wonderment. Yeah, well, hopefully Naomi and Rolf's tongues would get stuck to the bars now or something. It would serve them both right. For Ohana's boy, that makes sense. He's good pup. Cry last night, but no big deal. Everyone cries sometime. First time down here, no light? Tigre cried too. You did? Naira asked. Yeah. Above ground, when dark come, there always some light because stars or city. But below, when dark come, there is no light. Always scary first time. Still scary sometime. We're going to get you above ground, big boy. Give me a minute and we'll get this door open. With that, she began rummaging through her bag. Not to alarm, but how are we going to get that door open? Moira asked, as she pointed at the main door in and out of this room. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Moira, Naira said, as she took a dose of shimmer. Her eyes took on a faint prismatic glow. One problem at a time. Kinda seems like a big bracking problem. Yes, Naira said in a voice almost like a hiss. Which is why we're going to start with something small and manageable. Well, the small and manageable isn't gonna matter much if we can't get past the big door. I know, Naira snapped, and for the first time raised her voice at Moira. But it won't do us any good to panic and worry about what we can't do. So we need to stay focused on what we can do. Got it? It was that voice. It was the I'm your mother and I know best voice. It was the I can't cope any better than you, but I'm going to pretend I do voice. Moira felt the tears welling at the corners of her eyes, and she knew better than to talk back in a situation like this. But bracket, she was so stressed out that she couldn't help it, and she blurted, Naira, I'm scared! Naira froze, thumb poised to crack the aquam crystal in her grasp. And it was stupid, so stupid, but Moira had to get it out. It was too much to keep in. We're deep underground, with nothing but concrete and criminals and murderers between us and the exit. Mom doesn't know I'm down here, so she's not going to know to look for me. And you were right. I should have stayed with the bikes because then I could have gone for help. But I didn't because I thought I could help by coming along, and now we're here, and I can't help, and I'm just so scared and... Her pity party was interrupted as Naira lunged forward to hug her. The move caught her so off guard that the tears stopped for a moment. Normally, if she was stupid enough to have an outburst like this in front of her mother, it just led to being told that she would outgrow it, that she was being a baby, that adults shouldn't cry over stupid things. On rare occasions, her mother had slapped her and told her she was having a fit and to get over it. But this? This was short-circuiting every pathway in Moira's brain. Naira had been raising her voice too. Wasn't she angry? Shouldn't she be angry? But to hug her instead? The dam burst, and the stupid tears flowed as Moira returned the hug. After a few embarrassing quiet moments, Naira spoke in a softer voice meant just for Moira's ears. I'm scared too, but there has never been a single cage that has contained me forever, and I don't intend to die in this one. So trust me when I say that I'm going to get us out, and we're going to be all right. I'm sorry, Naira. Naira chuckled. Don't be. She gave her another squeeze, a firm, but not painful reminder of how little Moira was. Then she let go, leaned back, and placed a hand on Moira's shoulder. I've got something to take your mind off of it. Take some shimmer and listen to what I do. I'm going to teach you how to pick locks. 20 minutes passed according to Naira's wristwatch, and Moira's anxiety was still running wild. As a momentary distraction, Moira had picked up on the subtleties of forming and using an aquam pick, and even practiced on a few doors in here. At least if she died down here, she had learned a cool skill first. After springing both Rolf and Tigra from their respective cells, the group had gathered in the center of the room to review the tools at their disposal. Naomi had a crowbar the length of Moira's calf and a mini-sledge, both of which she'd smuggled in her pants. Detective McKinley had a heavy-duty looking handgun with an extra magazine, a shock baton with 2 spare batteries, a handheld firearm torch also with 2 spare batteries, a pair of handcuffs, and a can of pepper spray. Naira opened her stores from her alchemy bag, redistributing the shimmer so that Tigra and Rolf both had some to work with. Naira offered shimmer to Detective McKinley, but she politely declined. Then they all helped themselves to crystals. Tigra taking a few aurum and terrum crystals, Naomi keeping her aquam, and Rolf taking a few electrum crystals Moira hadn't realized were up for grabs. Couldn't she have some electrum or firearm? No. Naira insisted that she had to stick with the safer crystals, though she did give her a single aquam crystal, which felt more like a placating consolation prize than an actual victory. Now the adults huddled around the main door, discussing the best ways to try to deal with the internal electrum lock. Rolf and Naomi huddled together, sitting in each other's laps. When one would get uncomfortable, they'd trade places. Moira considered telling them to get a room, but they probably would. Then she'd have to hear some things that would make her wish for death, so best not to tempt them. She must have had some residual shimmer left in her system, because she heard a noise through the door. A loud but distant buzz, followed by an equally distant ka-thunk. Frowning, Moira got to her feet and walked towards the door. Detective McKinley spared her a glance, but quickly went back to strategizing. She hadn't heard it. The noise had been fast enough, maybe Moira had imagined it. Pressing her ear to the door, Moira listened. She could hear the creak of a door opening, then the uncertain shuffle of footsteps, then a voice, low and wailing like a ghost. Though she definitely still had shimmer, something was wrong. There was no song to this voice. That wasn't exactly true. The words were coming out in a mockery of a sing-song pattern. Lucky ones. Lucky ones. Aren't we all the lucky ones? But the person's song, that unique signature that accompanied everyone's voice and was only discernible via shimmer or prism or fractal, that signature component was a monotone. It was there, but singular in tone and focus. What the fanina did that mean? Something slammed into the other side of the door, and Moira felt her insides try to become her outsides as she jumped. The noise attracted everyone's attention, even the Nulfs and Tigra. Detective McKinley joined her at the door. "Hello?" she called. "Who's out there?" She and Moira both listened, while Naira stepped forward to peer through the bars. Lucky ones. There's still time for us. Lucky ones. Naira flinched back as sodden fingers, once orange but now brown and black, poked through the bars. You must be food. It's one of the prisoners, McKinley growled. What's he doing out of his cell? Moira kept her ears to the door, closing her eyes as she listened. After a few moments, she heard more footsteps heading this direction. More coming, I think. Great. As if the locked door wasn't bad enough, now they're blocking us with the worst of the worst. Ha! Tigris said, standing up to his full height and looming over the rest of them. His ears actually brushed the firearm bulb on the ceiling, which gave him a fittingly orange backlit glow. Fanina, he was big. Send as many as they want. Tigra punch through all. Always secret want big fight. McKinley shrugged. Guess that answers that. We pop the door, you charge out, and we follow? Eh? Tigra nodded, cracking knuckles on hands that Moira now noticed only sported 4 fingers each, including his thumbs. It didn't look like the result of any torture or accident. Cool. Another thing to make tigers unique. Seeming satisfied with his response, the detective nodded. Well, at least it can't get any worse. The firearm light bulb overhead flickered one last time and went out. The room was cast into such immediate darkness that Moira felt her stomach fall into her feet. The only light in the room now were the eyes of the people who had any shimmer in their system, and the faint firearm lighting of the occupancy indicators on the solitary cells the next room over. You had to say something, Naomi muttered. Don't be so hard on her, Rolf said from her lap. Apparently it was his turn to sit rather than be sat upon. It's important to stay positive during times like this. Well, it's kind of hard to find positives about our current situation, Naomi snapped back, rolling her eyes, which still held a bit of glow. Nah, Rolf shrugged. I can think of at least one. Oh? Naomi asked. The next moment, Moira heard them swapping saliva with their tongues. Something in her snapped. Seed Mother above, can you two not be horny for 5 minutes? We're teenagers, I get it. But Seed Mother, there's monsters out there, and you're snogging snouts in here? The room fell quiet. The only noise that remained came from outside the door. Apparently, the person on the other side found her outburst funny because he began cackling. Lucky ones, snog, he crooned. Shut the brack up! Moira was breathing heavily through her nose, her hands trembling as she gave the door a solid thump. No one asked for your commentary, you nutjob! You know, Rolf said quietly, everyone handles stress differently, and everyone finds different outlets. Rolf, came Naomi's voice, I don't think she's in the mood. True, he admitted. Like I said, we just have to focus on the positives. Yes, we're locked in here, but that means they're locked out there where they can't get us. It's all about reframing the situation. Yes, the light burn out in here, but the lights out there are fine, and we got shimmer and firearm for emergencies. So if you think about it, our situation actually can't get any... Don't, Naomi warned. Worse, Rolf finished. Even with only barely being able to make out the other people in the room, Moira could feel the collective flinch. Everyone held their breath. 5 seconds passed, then 10. A fresh, lucky ones came wafting through the bars. Rolf laughed as everyone let out their breath. You guys are a bunch of superstitious. He trailed off as the light filtering into the room changed colors. Moira heard an electric buzzing noise and a heavy, muffled thump. Taking a few steps back, she stood on her tiptoes to glimpse through the bars set in the door. The light outside one of the solitary cells had switched from orange to green. You could make lamps out of tarum? She would have to ask Naira about that later. Slowly, the door swung open. It didn't open far, maybe a couple of inches, but it was enough to see a set of large fingers curl around the edge of the door. Fingers covered in matted fur and tipped with thick, angry claws. Wisps of mist or smoke curled around the fingers in opaque swirls. All of it was cast in an unsettling green hue. One by one, all 4 active lights outside switched from orange to green as each solitary cell unlocked remotely. There was another buzz, and then even those lights were extinguished, plunging everything into darkness. On the other side of the room, Moira could hear the doors creaking open, heard the scuffle of padded feet and untrimmed claws on the concrete outside, heard the breathing that was unsteady and yet not. It seemed erratic, but it was following a pattern. And as with Lucky Ones himself, the true song of the creatures exiting solitary was monotonic. Through the bars, she caught glimpses of prismatic glow shining through the darkness. With the people in the room, the glow helped to call attention to detail in the eyes. It accentuated the irises and enriched the color. The eyes outside were glossy and glazed, but they could see, and they held hunger. Not the lucky ones, the voice crooned in a whimper outside the door. The next moment, something heavy slammed into the door. The man outside screamed. After that came the sounds of snapping bone and tearing flesh. Moira's hands shot up to cover her mouth, and she fell backwards in the dark, landing hard enough on her own tail to spawn fresh tears. It was dark now, so dark, so oppressively dark, and she could hear far more than she ever wanted to hear. She wanted so badly to open her eyes, to let any other sense take priority right now. Other screams, more distant. More snapping, crunching, tearing, ripping, growling, dripping, sobbing. Oh, she was the one sobbing. The carnival of horrors went on for minutes. She heard the heavy, lopsided footsteps, the erratic but somehow rhythmic breathing, the unmistakable sounds of multiple creatures eating. Now she could smell something, intrusively forcing its way into her nostrils and stabbing her brain with its pungence. It smelled like death, rot, and decay. Like a mouse left to bloat in a trap for weeks as maggots set in. Like a fish tank left unattended for so long that everything in it went belly up. No one spoke. It seemed most likely that no one knew what to say. What fresh fanina awaited them beyond that door? The door. The one thing standing between the 6 people huddled in here and whatever death machines feasted outside. The door would hold, right? They'd already hit it a couple times and it had stayed firm. But dark as it was, she had no idea how big these things were. No idea what they looked like. They were big. She'd seen the fingers. And she'd seen the eyes. But the body could be any shape, any size. She heard shuffling in the dark. Something grabbed her arm, and Moira screamed. A hand clamped down over her mouth, and something warm came up beside her ear. Shh, Naira whispered. Shh. You're all right. It's okay. It's just me. You're all right. The rustle of fabric preceded a brief hiss and sharp inhale. A few moments later, and Naira's eyes came into view. Moira clung to her, shuddering as she realized the noises outside had stopped. She struggled to moderate her own breathing, trying desperately to focus on that little 4-piece cadence at the end of every breath. That tiny, quiet melody that said, I am Moira. I am still alive. It was there, but it was struggling. Every attempt to latch onto it felt like trying to grasp a buttered utensil. She'd almost laid hold of it when she glanced back at the door. She hadn't meant to, but she had. And there, those glossy, horrible eyes were peering through the bars. She lost hold of any calmness in her breathing. Those predatory eyes of whatever anima spawn lurked outside had driven that right out of her. The more they frightened her, the more those dead eyes seemed to fixate on her. She wanted to stay calm. She needed to stay calm. Naira was calm, right? She focused on Naira's breathing, listening to the rhythm. No. Naira was having trouble staying calm, too. Oddly, that helped, at least in a small way. The eyes outside blinked. Moira wanted to look away, but she forced herself to keep looking. She would face this fear, and she would not let it beat her. She focused on her breathing, stared at the eyes staring at her. The eye contact lasted for an eternity. It felt like something alive, crawling under her skin. It left her mouth dry and her arms trembling, but she kept staring as if the moment she looked away she would die. Her terror was real, but she forced it down, down, down. And finally, the eyes vanished. The subsequent shuffle of padded feet and soft scratch of claws was so minute she only caught it because of her shimmer. It grew fainter and fainter. She could no longer hear the monsters breathing. Couldn't hear them at all. The world had gone quiet. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She heard everyone else in the room perfectly. Rolf, Naomi, Naira, Detective McKinley, Tigra, their own struggles to breathe, their own struggles to find calmness in the midst of all this insanity. It was all she heard anymore. That filled her with relief she couldn't express. A sound came to her ears, so close and so loud that her heart exploded. An electric buzz and a heavy ka-thunk. Their door had just unlocked. Chapter 31. Teeth in the Dark. Leo pulled into the District 8 prison parking lot. A wall of cars on the side was in active flux as day shift traded with night shift. The visitors' parking was empty, save for a pair of expensive-looking hoverbikes and Detective Melissa McKinley's police cruiser. Parking beside it, Leo got out and glanced in the window. He didn't expect to find her in her car, so he wasn't truly disappointed to find it empty. The setting sun cast the enormous concrete structure in an ominous light. It loomed like a rock perched at the top of a hill, just waiting to roll over and bury him beneath it. Usually, the biggest rocks hid the nastiest bugs, just waiting to burst free the moment you lifted the rock. Wow, he was not in a great mood. He'd already stopped at a payphone to call in the bodies to Tolson. Several officers had been dispatched to see to the crime scene. A pair of officers that Tolson trusted were sent to go check on Arana's house in District 9. Meanwhile, Tolson needed to stay at the precinct to act as a dispatch. He didn't want to, but Leo pulled rank and his friend listened. So it was, Leo walked into the prison lobby alone. The lights in the front were dimmed, as if Minister of Justice Paddock couldn't afford a few dozen Christum a day for spare light bulbs for his prison. There was no one on the other side of the glass at the front counter. Fifth wealthiest man in the city, and he couldn't afford staff either? A small brass bell had been put away for the night, but Leo could just barely reach it by shoving his arm through the slot, usually reserved for passing documents back and forth. He dragged it to a more comfortable position and started ringing it. It echoed through that room and bounced around in the lobby. There was no response to one ring, so Leo tried 2, then 3 in a row. The longer he waited, the more his finger rang a bell of its own accord. The sound was starting to grate on his ears. Surely someone back there heard it. Finally, the door behind the desk opened, and a guard in uniform stepped in. Water dripped from his hands, which he rubbed on his pants. "Prison's closed," he said in a gruff voice. "I do not care," Leo said, lifting his badge and pressing it to the glass. "Police Chief Parsons, District 3. I've got a detective back there somewhere working on a prisoner transfer." The guard frowned. "I wasn't made aware of any transfers tonight." "You haven't seen a detective dressed like me come through here?" Shaking his head, the guard replied that he hadn't. "That said, I just started my shift 10 minutes ago. Polly didn't say anything about guests, though she did mention putting in a call for a tow truck for a couple abandoned vehicles in the lot." "I strongly suggest that you call off that tow truck." "Yeah, I'll get right on that," the guard said, in a voice that sounded like it couldn't be bothered to do much of anything. Suppressing a snarl, Leo put his badge back on his belt. "Buzz me in." The guard opened his mouth to protest, but seemed to change his mind upon reading the seriousness in Leo's face. With a nod, he pressed a button, and Leo heard the main door unlock. After a quick thank you, Leo stepped through and entered the prison proper. Having been here yesterday, he remembered the path to the warden's office. He had to flash his badge at another passing guard to buzz him through, but that was a minor inconvenience. He found the warden, face down on his desk, a glass tumbler clutched loosely in unmoving fingers. A ring of brown liquid decorated the bottom, its source a nearby capped bottle of whiskey. Oh, that wouldn't do. Leo pounded a fist on the desk, and the warden let out a startled yelp. He lifted his head slowly, eyes bloodshot beneath lids nearly screwed shut. "Warden?" Leo said coldly. Glancing up at him, the warden's expression morphed from surprise to horror at such riveting speeds that his flesh must have been replaced with molasses. His words tumbled out with equal rapidity. "Chief?" I did what you said. You can check. You can. Then he managed to open his eyes a little wider and really look at Leo. Oh, my apologies. I thought you was someone else. Where's my detective? Detective? The warden repeated, as if he'd never heard the word before. She came and left already. Then why is her car still in your parking lot? The warden's ears flattened and his whiskers drooped. Finally, he said, If she came back, I don't know where she went. Leaning over the desk, Leo reached out and rotated the whiskey bottle. Uncapping it, he took a whiff. It smelled potent. Oh, help yourself, the warden said as he stood up with effort. Let me get you a glass. Professionals don't drink on the clock, Leo said pointedly. Isn't it a bit early? The warden's hands came together, wringing themselves as if they had nothing better to do. His tail twitched in delayed flicks. When you've seen enough around here, son, there's no such thing as too early to have a little drink to calm the nerves. Leo had pegged the guy as a piece of work the day before, but this was something different. Before, he'd been confident, able to deal with his insecurities by taking it out on his charges. But now, he looked like his insecurities or his fears had taken the wheel. I ask again, where's my detective? The man glanced first at Leo, then at the phone on his desk, then at the empty glass. I'm sure she'll turn up. It's a big place, so if we're patient, This wasn't working. If the man was motivated by fear, Leo could use that. He stepped into the man's space, reaching up to grip the warden by his lapel. I warn you, warden. Bradburn may have been bigger than me, but I'm just as dangerous of a chief as he was. This drew a string of nervous laughter out of the warden, so Leo shook him. Tell me where my detective is, or I swear to Seed Mother I'll strap you to your chair and waterboard you with your own whiskey. No one was more surprised than Leo with how convincing his tone of voice was. Thankfully, the warden didn't know that there wasn't a violent bone in Leo's body. Not truly. The warden's eyes widened, and they really were bloodshot. That's illegal. So was drinking on the clock as a lawman, Dipdross, Leo growled. He was inches from the man's face, and could almost taste the alcohol in his breath. With a grunt, he shoved the man roughly back into his chair. It rolled a few inches, but Leo leaned in, digging his claws into the arms of the chair for emphasis. Now start talking. Tigra, the door! Naira shouted. On it! Her old friend replied, letting out an audible grunt as he threw his weight into the door. Detective, we could use some light. There was no reply, but her small firearm torch flickered to life in her hands a few moments later. It did little to actually light the room, except for whatever she aimed at directly. If anything, the new contrast between lit areas and shadows was even more unnerving. The room stank of fear. None of them were immune to the effects. They'd all heard the same things. Naira's nose still hadn't fully recovered from that rank stench that was Necrom, but somehow worse. You knew a scent was bad when the traces of formaldehyde you detected in it were the pleasant part. Naira still had a hold of Moira's arm, and the poor girl was shaking like a leaf. Naira herself probably wasn't holding up much better. One didn't encounter monsters inside the bulb, much less be caged inside with them. Thankfully, Salatra had taken over, and she was too livid about her current situation to let fear freeze her. Tigra, can you see what's out there? Not really. Something stink on the other side of door. And maybe see movement. Light, please. Shadows danced around the room as Detective McKinley joined him at the door. Holding her light up to the bars, they both peered out. There's something hunched over, almost like a person, but stretched out, she mused, rotating her torch. I'm trying to get a look at the face. Sorry, my cat was attacking my hoodie. Something screamed outside, an awful noise caught between a howl and a shriek. "Oh, Dross," Melissa said, ducking away from the bars and throwing her shoulder against the door. A moment later, something heavy slammed into the door with so much force, Tigra himself was pushed back a few inches. His claws left trails in the concrete as they looked for purchase and found none. With a loud grunt of exertion, his elbows quivered as he took back the ground he'd lost. The impact had knocked the detective away from the door, her firearm torch clattering to the ground, but she threw herself back against the door to help hold it. And that seemed to be from just one of those creatures out there. Naira had counted 4. If any of the others came to help. Tigra would waste his strength if they kept this up. No, they couldn't afford to try to hole up in here. They needed to take the fight to the creatures while they still had energy to fight. Besides, Silatra was long overdue to explode. "How bad is it?" Naira asked. "Bad," Detective McKinley and Tigra said in unison. "Face looked drippy, skin stretched tight till see bone, teeth much too long." "Not sure if you've ever read comics," the detective chimed in as she grunted against the door. "But picture an anima spawn that's the love child of a zombie and a werewolf and you're on the right track." That sounded distinctly unpleasant, especially with the odors Naira had been picking up. "Pretty big?" she asked. "Not quite as big as Big Man here, but yeah, pretty brackin' big." Tigra roared as something snagged him through the bars and ripped free, drawing blood. "Wolf should not have claw! Is cheat!" Naira quickly walked a few steps to grab the discarded torch before holding it out to Moira. "We're going to have to go out there if we want to survive this. If we let things happen on their terms, we're dead for sure. We're going to need to be able to see what we're fighting." Moira looked incredulously at the firearm torch, but took it anyway. "This barely lets us see one person at a time. How is that going to help?" "On its own, it wouldn't help much. But I'm not trusting just anyone with a light. I'm giving it to an Alchemancer, who's going to flare it for us." Moira's eyes widened as the words sank in. Her surprise was plain on her face, so Naira gave the girl a wink and a pat on the cheek. "Take your shimmer ahead of time, and you'll do great." "Detective, you have extra batteries." Melissa nodded, leaving her position at the door and running over to deliver them and show Moira how to replace them in the torch. "Naomi, Rolf, you kids up for a scrap?" They'd stopped consoling each other when the door unlocked, and their eyes came alight as they both took doses of shimmer. Naomi scooped up her crowbar in one hand and readied an aquam crystal in the other. Rolf stood and stretched his neck and shoulders. "I'm ready to give something a good punching," he said with a remarkably casual air. "All right, Tigra, when I give the word, open the door and we'll punch through whatever's out there." He nodded grimly, though he couldn't hide his growing excitement. He also seemed to be looking forward to giving a good punching. "What if we let one in?" Moira asked. All eyes turned to her, and Naira raised an eyebrow. Gripping the torch in both hands like she was wielding a sword, Moira's eyes were bright with shimmer. She swallowed hard and repeated herself. "What if we let one in? That way we get an idea what we're in for before we go charging out there?" Naira smirked. Silatra wanted to explode so badly, she'd almost thrown good sense and tactics out the window. Thank Seed Mother for granting them at least one voice of reason. "I like that plan better," Naira admitted. "We'll let that one in and fight it right here in the middle. Moira, pick one of the cells where you can light the room without being in danger." The look on Moira's face said she knew being in here at all put her in danger, but she nodded and ran over to one of the central cells. "More are coming," she warned. "I can hear them moving around out there, too." "Then we'll have to be fast. Tigra, once you let it in, don't let any more through that door." "Tigra become wall," he assured. "Detective?" Naira turned to see McKinley activating her shock baton. The blue glow of its electrified end lit up her face, and she nodded. Ready as I'm going to be. Yeah, that was about the sum of it. Naira grabbed 4 out of the dozens of shimmer canisters still left in her bag, taking each one in turn. She didn't bother to save these canisters, tossing them out into the dark where they wouldn't be a tripping hazard. Her senses came to life in that wonderful way that only an alchemancer could understand. The stench pouring into the room was enough to make her eyes water. Shadows grew sharper as the room seemed to get a little brighter. She heard scratching at the door. As was her usual custom, Naira packed 2 small aurum crystals in her cheeks before taking an electrum crystal in each fist. People ready for monster? Tigra asked. The reply came instantly in the affirmative. He gave a nod, braced himself, waited for a few moments, then flung open the door. Some of the orange glow in their room spilled out into the room beyond, but did little to help chase away the shadows. Something moved, and then an enormous form burst through the open doorway, moving on 4 limbs instead of just 2. Tigra slammed the door shut. Moira flared the firearm lighting the room, and the monster charged straight for Naira. They hadn't been kidding. It was big. Maybe a head taller than her if it wasn't currently loping towards her on all 4s. Elements of its form were almost Nolfin, but the lips had been stretched back and the jaw distended. The gore-covered teeth were sharp and jagged, with protruding fangs nearly the length of her thumb. The glowing, glassy eyes were sunken into the skull, the skin around them stretched and sickly. It reached out for her with claw-tipped hands on arms that must have stretched down to its knees. Fur had fallen from this creature in clumps, leaving frequent bare patches of exposed, taut skin. Rancid breath washed over Naira as this thing's mouth opened wide enough that her fist could have fit inside. Cracking both crystals in her hands, Salatra exploded. The fur along her hands and arms stood straight out at the release of electrum energy. She visualized it leaving her palms, leaping into the creature's face, and then traveling through its body until it found the floor. The shimmer took hold, and the magic cooperated. Large blue arcs of electricity jumped from Naira's fingers and slammed into the monster. It convulsed, muscles rippling beneath too tight skin, as blue electricity sparked across its entire body. The creature's momentum carried it into her anyway, its weight forcing them to the ground. The thing writhed on top of her, but didn't cry out. Maybe with the shock to its system, it couldn't? Her own shoulder erupted in pain a moment later, the creature's teeth digging into bone. Past the pain, she felt something else. Something entirely alien that chilled her to her core. Somehow, this thing was draining her shimmer. She knew what it was like to lose shimmer or prism over time. You lost a little with every breath. That was natural. But this? This was evaporating like she'd used it to harness and focus magic. Only she hadn't. The electrum had taken nearly half of what she'd drawn in, but she had lost nearly another quarter in just a few seconds. With those glassy eyes now inches from her own, she saw their glow increase. Vanina's cracks, this really was an anima spawn. A crowbar smashed into the creature's skull repeatedly. The thing's body rocked with the impact, but it seemed wholly unbothered. It held onto Naira, chewing on her shoulder until her shimmer was gone. Only once she'd been drained did it let go. Then it leapt for the next closest person, the one with the crowbar. Naomi held her blunt instrument like a batter in a ball game. She swung as it flew towards her and connected with its skull with an audible crack. The head twisted with the blow, but swung back to face her a moment later. It had taken the impact, yes, but it simply didn't care. Rolf leapt in then, driving an electrified fist under its chin. Detective McKinley followed up with a swing of her own, thrusting her sparking baton into this thing's armpit. It convulsed, its whole body tensing, and muscles roiling in a way that looked like it would split the skin. Careful, Naira called, reaching into her bag. I don't know how, but it drained my shimmer. Scooping out 2 canisters this time, she refreshed her system with more shimmer. The creature stood rooted in place as Detective McKinley's shock baton continued to unload its charge. Naira smelled burnt flesh. The creature's body was reacting to the constant shock, but there didn't seem to be any sort of pain response. Maybe she should test that. This time, she pulled a firearm crystal from her bag, a high-grade one. McKinley's shock baton ran out of charge. She backed off to swap out for a fresh battery, and the monster swung on her. Not quite instantly. There were still a few split seconds where its muscles didn't respond to its will. But when they did, the intent was clear. Cracking the crystal, Naira gathered a ball of flame above her palm and pushed it at the creature. She could feel the flames singeing the fur on her hands. High-grade materials were not a toy. The creature reared up, making that awful cry again as it brought its massive hands with their 2 long fingers up to shield its face. Now Naira really smelled burnt fur and flesh. No sooner had the flames dissipated than the creature was moving again. Its hands, arms, and torso had been badly burned. The skin looked like it finally had split in spots. Yet none of the damage seemed to slow the creature as it rushed for Naira again. Ice encased its hind leg a moment later, locking the limb in a stiffly outstretched position before causing the creature to awkwardly faceplant. And still, the creature acted like this wasn't anything more than a trivial inconvenience, simply dragging the frozen limb behind it as it continued ambling forward. Naomi stared slack-jawed at the creature she'd just tried to stick to the ground. "What's wrong with this thing?" she cried out as she fished for another aquam crystal. "I don't think it can feel pain," Naira called back, producing a Tarum crystal. Cracking it, she tossed it at the monster's face. At her will and instruction, vines sprouted from the crystal, wrapping around the oblong skull and tugging it downward to lash it to an unnaturally lanky arm. A thin, green mist emanated from the cracked remains of Tarum, faint in the orange glow of the firearm torch Moira was dutifully using to give the group light. "Come on, calm down," she urged the creature. This thing was easily 4 times the size of any deerhound, and seemed to have at least twice the aggression and violent tendencies. Still, the calming effect of Tarum was not to be underestimated. The creature stumbled backward, slipping on its stiff, frozen leg. Its head lolled from side to side, and it reached up to paw at its face with burned, bloody fingers. Everyone waited to see what would happen. Naomi stood with crowbar held high in one hand and aquam crystal clutched in the other. Rolf had taken up a boxer's stance and was circling to stay on the creature's left side. Detective McKinley reloaded her shock baton and stood opposite Rolf. Naira's shoulder ached, but she couldn't stop to treat it with Curum until this thing was subdued. "I don't think Electrum's working, Mrs. N," Rolf called. "It's working. It just doesn't care about how much damage it takes. I don't think we're going to be able to stun it or knock it out." "So, we have to kill it?" the detective asked, uncertain. "If this doesn't pacify it, then yeah, that might be our only option." A heavy thud sounded from the door, and Tigra grunted. "Not to alarm. More outside. Best hurry with finish this one." The monster's movements were growing slow and lethargic, only one glowing eye visible beneath the tangle of vines. The ragged claws scraped against the crystal fixed to its face and sliced a few of the vines. It was working. Naira allowed herself a smirk. She had yet to meet a creature that enough Tarum couldn't pacify. The creature's fingers wrapped around the crystal fragments and yanked them free, snapping dozens of thin vines. It tossed the remains aside, movements regaining their unnatural speed. It hadn't worked. It had bought them time, and maybe with enough Tarum it could work. But not this time. Naomi used her next aquam crystal, and more ice spread up the side of the creature's torso and arm. It impeded its movement, making the motion more stiff, awkward, and heavy than usual. Even limping as it was, it threw itself at Naira. Rolf tried to shock it, but again it pushed on once the shock wore off. It was visibly slowing, yet it remained just as relentless. How much punishment could this thing take? Surely any actual person should be dead or incapacitated by now, right? Reaching into her bag, Naira's hand fished for another firearm crystal, but the creature was already on her. Raising her arms defensively, she only barely kept the thing's snapping jaws from biting into her own muzzle. Straining as she was, she could feel this creature's strength easily outdoing her own. Like losing an arm wrestling match, her elbows were sliding away from her. She snarled, straining to get her feet underneath this thing so she could kick it off. Again, the rancid breath from that ravenous maw, snapping together inches from her face, was enough to make her eyes water. It smelled of meat, of gore, of death. A gunshot rang out in the room with an explosive flash. The creature's head jerked to the side. Slowly, it snapped back, only to be met with a second gunshot, and then a third. The creature's weight transitioned into dead weight as it lost the ability to support itself on its own limbs. Naira rolled, a deep growl accompanying the mighty heave she gave to push the thing off of herself. It slumped onto the ground in a tangle of its own deformed, unnatural limbs. It twitched, and Detective McKinley stepped forward to fire more rounds straight into the thing's skull. She didn't stop firing until it stopped twitching. It took a total of 8 shots, including the 3 she'd used just to get it off of Naira. Today was a strange day indeed when Naira should encounter something she disliked more than guns. She still didn't like guns, but the detective had made the right call. Lowering the gun, McKinley helped Naira back onto her feet. Sorry, I probably should have opened with that. Naira grimaced. You couldn't have known. Besides, I'm of the impression that shooting it anywhere but the head would have just encouraged it. Still more outside, Tigra grunted, barely keeping the door shut. What sort of fresh vanina is this? Detective McKinley muttered as she raised her gun. With a mirthless smirk, Naira rolled her shoulder to test it. The real kind, she grunted in pain. Yep, her shoulder needed some attention soon. They needed Tigra's brute strength to deal with these things. His natural abilities were wasted on door duty. However, the idea had been wise, and they'd learned a few things about what they were up against, and most importantly, how much it took to take one down. Unfortunately, there were still 3 more to go. Lights going down, Moira warned as she replaced the battery on the torch. The world around them plunged into darkness broken only by the glowing eyes of the 4 Alchemancers in the room. The eyes of the creature they had just killed stared sightlessly at a wall, their own glow fading. Desperate for any substantial light source again, Moira fumbled with the cap on the bottom of the torch. She managed not to drop it, though a spike of panic still lanced her chest as she thought for a second she had. To her great relief, she got the fresh battery installed and the cap screwed back on. A moment later, the room was lit with orange once more. Everyone ready? Naira asked. Her gaze fell particularly on Detective McKinley, who was checking the bullets left in her gun. There's going to be a lot of glowing eyes out there. I trust you're going to be careful with your aim. The detective frowned as she clicked the bullet holdy thingy back into place. I will not shoot unless I can see what I'm shooting. I don't intend to shoot any of you. Good enough for me, Naira said, in a tone meant to convey satisfaction. It was hidden, but Moira knew her well enough by now to pick up the hint of doubt in her voice. Moira, stay behind us and just light up what you can, okay? Moira started at the direct call-out. The torch felt slick against her palm pads, like she was going to drop it any moment. She gripped it tighter. Knowing the flashlight wasn't going anywhere wasn't the same as believing it. Yeah, I'll do my best. With a small smile, barely visible in the orange glow, Naira replied, You're going to do just fine. Then her attention was back on the door. When you're ready, Tigra, we'll take whatever you don't go for. The tiger grinned, looking every bit the overconfident barbarian eager for a fight. In that case, he said, his body tensing against the door. Seed mother. The muscles in his arms and legs looked like someone had stuffed a bunch of melons under his skin. It's time, he announced as he threw open the door and socked a monster in the face. As with the last one, the creature took the bone-cracking impact, which physically jostled it, but it seemed unperturbed by any damage it sustained. With a roar that resonated alongside the almost tribal drumbeat of Tigra's song, the tiger clamped an enormous hand around the monster's throat and charged out the door with it. The rest of them followed on his heels, Moira in the middle, humming quietly to flare the torch's output as they burst into the next room. Aiming at the ceiling seemed to provide the best lighting for the hallway, leaving the floors cast in shadow. That was for the best. Moira's feet slid in something wet before she almost tripped over a body. She stayed upright and pointedly did not look with more than her periphery. Rolf left the room in such a hurry he missed it and actually tripped. The sound as he landed included a horrific squelch, and Moira tried not to think about all the internal organs of Mr. Lucky Ones that had cushioned his fall. Despite Rolf's initial cry of alarm and general look of disgust, he was on his feet again in a few seconds. A dull thud rang out as Tigra slammed the monster in his hand against the opposite wall. As he moved to follow up with his free hand, the dead-looking creature in his grip came to life. The pair lit into each other in a frenzied series of swiping claws and tangled limbs. For his part, Tigra fought with the slow, methodical approach of a practiced fighter, every hit landing with power and precision. By contrast, the monster was a feral thing, attacking with flailing limbs and strength that defied the gauntness of its decrepit body. Within seconds, their fight had gone to the floor, looking more like a wrestling match than a fight for survival. The creature's teeth clacked together repeatedly, but they caught nothing except empty air. Tigra wasn't going to give this thing a chance to siphon his shimmer. The others didn't have a chance to help him. No sooner had they burst from the room and Rolf regained his feet, when another monster, like the first two, came charging into the fray. As the others, it made no sound, save for the thumping of its paws and the oddly patterned and monotonic breathing. Naira crunched a crystal in her fist, swinging in an uppercutting motion. A burst of aurum followed, catching the creature under the chin and smashing it against the ceiling. Rolf followed with a volley of electrified punches, while Naomi tried to trap its limbs in ice. Detective McKinley aimed carefully, and Moira made sure to hold the light steady. They could do this. Everyone just had to be calm and stay focused. Melissa's fingers squeezed the trigger, and Moira's ears screamed in pain. She flattened them, moving her hands to cover them, but knowing it wouldn't help with all the shimmer in her system. Trying to stop sound of that volume while having enhanced hearing was about as effective as using a sheet of paper to stop the water from a hose. Moira didn't hear the last of the creatures until it struck her from behind. The torch fell from her grip, clattering to the ground and casting different corners into shadow. Her back ached from her shoulder blade across her spine and down to her hip, a dull, burning ache that made her wince, though that only made the pain spike. She felt 3 distinct trails carved there. "Moira, the light!" the detective called, though she must have figured out what happened a moment later. More shots rang out, and Moira's head pounded in response. She felt several sharp things punch into her leg, and then she was being dragged away. She screamed, equal parts pain and terror, as her body moved in a direction she hadn't willed it. The lighting in the room changed as someone kicked the flashlight in one of the scuffles. Shadows danced across the walls, a war in the dark. Moira's claws dug at the concrete, but didn't catch. If they had, they might have torn free. The creature dragging her was significantly stronger than she was. Gritting her teeth against the fire in her leg, she found the words to call for help. She heard several shouted responses, promises that someone was coming, but it didn't stop her being dragged away. The creature responsible rolled her over, and she came face to face with one of the devil's harbingers, an anima spawn, here to drag her down into Fanina's underbelly for an eternity of torment, but not before feasting on her corpse. The creature's elongated snout sniffed at her, bare fangs protruding from a jaw that dripped blood. Cast in as much shadow as it was, the most prominent feature was those horrible dead but glowing eyes. As she felt her own terror grow, she felt these things' eyes fix on her with growing clarity. Her hand fumbled for her jacket pocket, fingers desperately seeking the opening. She found it. The small crystals within played hide-and-seek with her fingers, until finally she gripped one. She didn't know which one, and she didn't care. Pulling it up towards her face, she grabbed it with both hands and cracked it. A gunshot rang out then, and Moira's hearing was temporarily lost to a painful ringing. She had no way of hearing what type of crystal she'd cracked, much less how to harmonize with it. Pressure built against her fingers. It had to be aurum. How did Aurum's song go again? Reaching up, She jammed the crystal into the monster's nostril, singing what she hoped was Orum's song. She couldn't find it. The crystal didn't respond to her. It simply exploded. The pressure wave it released cracked her head against the unyielding concrete. The headache that followed almost rivaled the pain in her leg. How had no one been able to help her yet? Wasn't someone coming? Above her, the creature's head was flung to the side, and it staggered backwards as a rush of pressure equal to the one that had just hit Moira was forced through its sinuses with nowhere else to go. Naira had warned that Orum could rupture nasal passages and even lungs. Moira witnessed this firsthand as the side of the creature's muzzle burst outwards in a spray of gore. Its chest leapt forward, expanding like a balloon, before a rush of air burst from the creature's nose and mouth. Moira scrambled backwards, forcing herself to her feet. Her left calf didn't want to hold her weight, but it could if she forced it, so she bore the pain. Now it was a competition between her back, her head, and her legs which one was most deserving of her attention. Each one bore a slightly different song, indicating what had been damaged and how badly. The fact she could hear them at all was encouraging. It meant her hearing was coming back. She heard something else running towards her, but not the heavy, lopsided footfalls of one of the monsters. No, this was someone else. Naira was coming to help. But it wasn't Naira that entered Moira's field of vision. "Get away from her, freak!" Naomi cried out as she ran past and jammed the hook of her crowbar into the soft tissue behind the creature's jaw. Ice sprouted from the wound, encasing any blood in frozen crystalline growths. Moira could hear the changes in the Aquam's song as Naomi gave it instructions. She watched as ice shot upwards through the creature's tongue and punched through the top of its muzzle. Then she heard something else, a low monotone that was changing. The creature's song shifted in pitch until it found where the Aquam's song started and began to mimic it. Then, to Moira's surprise, it reversed it. That was the only word that Moira could find to describe what she heard. Somehow, it produced a song in perfect opposition to the Aquam. All the ice in its mouth melted in an instant, and water poured from the holes that were left behind. "Oh, what the fanina!" Naomi exclaimed as the creature's song returned to its low monotone. Shaking its head sprayed them both with droplets of water, saliva, and blood. Then it leapt for Naomi. The monster latched onto her arm with a crunch that sounded to Moira like a large tree branch cracking under its own weight. Naomi cried out in pain as the glow in her eyes started to fade. Her other arm still held the crowbar, and she swung it wildly, beating against the head of a creature that would not let go. Moira racked her brain for the best way to help. She couldn't damage this thing any more than Naomi was already doing. She wasn't confident enough in her supply or ability to throw this thing with Orum the way Naira had. She needed something to draw it away, but what? Shadows danced around the room, which dimmed significantly as someone kicked the torch again. In a moment of clarity, Moira remembered the only time these creatures had made significant noise. Turning, she saw a desperate scene. Rolf and Naira were trying to lock their monster down with electricity, long enough for the detective to take a clear shot. But any time one got a hold of it, the thing slipped out of the grasp of the other. Tigra had managed to armbar the one he was fighting, and seemed to be attempting to dislocate or snap the limb. The thing beneath him was clawing at him, and drawing fresh trails of blood all the while. And there, a few feet from where the tiger grunted in exertion, was Detective McKinley's firearm torch. Moira hobbled towards it, almost taking a knee just on the first step. Gritting her teeth, she powered through the several excruciating steps it took to scoop up the light. She wheeled on where the creature most on her mind had pinned Naomi to the wall. Again and again, the Amazonian goddess hit the larger creature's skull with her crowbar. Each hit gave a crack of bone that Moira could hear, and still the thing would not let go. Naomi's eyes had lost all glow, while the creature's own eyes had only grown brighter. "Well, all the better to see you with, my dear, right?" Raising the torch, Moira hummed in time with the firearm, finding its song, then harmonizing. Gunshots rang out behind her, as painful as ever, but she'd already found the song. Continuing it, she introduced a new melody to the song, complementary to its existing melody, as she commanded, "Focus!" Shadows overtook the room. What had before been a broad expansion of moderate light now tightened into a beam of orange of higher intensity than Moira had known Fyram could reach. She brought that overexcited orange beam to bear right on the creature's eyes. It screamed in a sound that started as a howl and ended in a shriek that abruptly cut off. The creature's bloodied hands came up in an attempt to shield its eyes. Most importantly of all, it let go of Naomi. As the monster staggered away, it slumped against the wall, crying out again against the harshness of the light being directed its way. Naomi wasted no time, bashing its skull over and over. It made no effort to stop her. It just slumped down further against the wall, in what could almost be described as the fetal position. Yet again, Moira was struck by how Nolfin these things looked, monstrous as they were. Ow! Raker, that's my foot. My boy just bit my foot. They were big, tall, lanky, and falling apart as they seemed to be almost growing out of their own skin. But that was a distinctly canine snout, and what bits of fur remained on them were a dirty brown. What were they? And how long had they been locked away down here? The Fyram torch flickered and went out. Flaring it to such an extent had drained the battery in a matter of seconds. In the absolute blackness that followed, those eyes came to life again, slowly coming out from behind the creature's hands. She saw them move as she heard Naomi continue to hit it, light or no light. Now they stared at her, and they were still hungry. Dross! She hadn't expected to burn out the battery that fast. It had been more effective than she'd hoped, but now she had to replace it again. She only had one battery, and this one was going to have to last. She found the battery in her pocket and unscrewed the cap. "Moira, the light!" the detective called through the dark. "We've almost got this one, but I can't shoot what I can't see." "Working on it," Moira huffed, old battery bouncing off the ground as she inserted the new one. The creature before her closed its eyes, and the glow disappeared. Naomi's next hit connected, but the one after that bounced off of muscle, not bone. The third swing in the dark missed entirely, and she cursed as she lost her balance. Before Moira could screw the cap back onto the torch, something crashed into her side and sent her to the ground. Terror set in a moment later as the worst possible reality came true. She'd lost the cap. Those glowing eyes reappeared a moment later, close enough to touch. They scanned the darkness with a dull gaze. Then, as Moira's fear spiked, they settled and seemed to focus on her. Teeth punched through her already bleeding leg. She cried out as muscles tore, and just like breathing out too fast, she felt her shimmer starting to drain. Having taken a significant dose before leaving the cell, she had a lot in her system. Probably more than Naira would be happy with, but this was an emergency. Excuse me. Though she had used a large chunk of it to flare the Fyram, what shimmer she had left was more than enough to enhance the pain she now felt. She could feel in excruciating detail the surface of the teeth that were chewing on her calf. Double-edged sword as the shimmer was, it also helped her to think clearly, in spite of her fear and panic. Keeping a thumb over the good Fyram battery, she rolled over as best she could, with several hundred pounds of monster tearing into her leg like a kit with a Whitecrest drumstick. Her hand groped in the dark, desperately searching for that little round piece of threaded metal. "Moira, the light!" Naira called, a nearby crack of blue electricity granting a brief spark of illumination. The monster had stopped using Moira's leg to clean between its teeth, but was now sucking on the wound it had caused. What? On top of everything else, now the zombie werewolf anima spawn was a vampire too? It hurt less, but was somehow an even more unpleasant experience. Tears of pain, tears of terror, tears of frustration all poured down Moira's face, and it was all she could manage to call back, "Lost the bracking cap!" Others continued to fight in the dark. She heard something snap over in Tigra's direction. Heard the dull thumps of fists hitting flesh with the other crew and their monster. Felt this monster drinking from her leg. The seconds crawled by, and the tears flowed as she searched but found nothing. The cap! Where was the bracking cap? Smaller movement sounded near her, then something gripped her arm. There you are, Pips, a voice said wearily. A hand traveled up Moira's arm before forcing something small and rounded into her hand. It was the cap. Somehow Naomi had found it. Moira screwed on the cap until it clicked, and the torch burst to life. Like a torch using actual flames, Moira planted the firearm light on the ground, illuminating the room in orange once more. With the return of the light, it was a matter of a few seconds before gunshots rang out again. The creature the other group had been fighting collapsed to the ground, no longer moving. Leaving that one, Naira ran towards Tigra, who had somehow stood his monster up and walked it over to one of the giant steel solitary cell doors. Positioning its head in the gap between door and frame, he braced the door shut with a knee and called out for Orym. Naira produced several crystals, cracked them all at once, and stepped up beside Tigra. Together, they latched onto the wind magic and slammed the door shut with a force that left Moira feeling like her ears needed to pop. The creature's new headless body slid to the ground as Tigra released it, leaving a smear of unnaturally dark blood on the frame. That left the one sucking on Moira's leg. She didn't want to look at it. With how badly her leg hurt, she didn't want to know what it looked like. Every time she had shown fear around these creatures, they had responded as if they had felt it. So now she fought the overflowing panic in her chest, trying to focus on how the pain was lessening a bit. Desperate, she focused on her own breathing, on her own song, humming it to calm herself, if even just a little. She felt Naomi hit the monster again, but the creature growled and dug its teeth in again, unwilling to give up what it had discovered. When Moira cried out in pain, Naomi didn't try it a second time. Don't move, Kit, we'll get it off, the detective said, reloading as she ran past Moira's field of view. Rolf ran past as well, asking how he could help. Hold it still, the detective called. Gritting her teeth, Moira screwed her eyes shut and waited for the gunshots. In those few moments of extended silence, she heard something. The creature's breathing wasn't erratic like before. It was normalizing. And more of note, the creature's song had changed. It was mimicking something else, something Moira was intimately familiar with. The creature was mimicking her song. Before, the creature had mimicked Naomi's Aquam, but now it was following that personal four-piece cadence known only to Moira, as if it could hear her quiet, tremulous hum. And something in Moira was responding, like she herself was the energy of an alchemical reaction waiting to be harnessed. More than that, despite the extremely unpleasant sensation of slobber and blood soaking through her fur, the pain was lessening. No doubt due to the shimmer being stolen from her, but perhaps... had it done something to her? Or with her? Wait! She called out. Too late. 4 gunshots rang out in rapid succession, and the ringing in her ears drowned out everything else. The creature's jaws went slack around her leg, and the others peeled it off. Naira came running over, crouching down beside her, arm already reaching for her alchemical bag. You're hurt pretty bad, Moira. I can give you Shimmer and Curum if you want to treat yourself, but it's going to make your pain a lot worse before it gets better. Or I can try to patch you up, which shouldn't be nearly so painful, but I'm not sure I would do as good a job as you. Your call. I'll do it, Moira said. The pain was already bad. If making it worse ultimately helped it get better, then it was worth it. Besides, it would feel good to do something useful, even if just for herself. Accepting the supplies Naira offered, she set to work cooperating with her song to repair herself. And all the while, the creature's voice sounded in her head, mimicking her song, her unique song, her most precious discovery and possession, cheaply copied by a monster. To what end? She wasn't sure, but the more she thought about it, the more she was glad it was gone. Maybe now the nightmare was finally over.